4544.
Hello, welcome to another Torn Tuesday. I'm Chelsea. This is Clifford Broadway.
One
as
of
you
these
know.
might.
We found the working microphone.
One of these, I knew I had. No, yes. No, yes.
How's everybody doing?
No, yes.
Who saw Tolkien this past weekend? Let's see those comments in the chat room.
I'm doing a little song from History of the World Part 1, but nobody noticed. Making a Mel Brooks reference and nobody noticed. Oh my gosh.
We noticed.
Yeah, you noticed. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to our live stream broadcast from Scum and Villainy Cantina.
Whoop,
This
whoop.
is theonering.net, and we call it Torn, affectionately our short form for the One Ring Net. And this is Torn Tuesday. Chelsea,
Hi, Cliff.
it is lovely to see you, my
You
friend.
as always.
Flying across the world and back, well, Santa Fe and back, and
Yes.
and here I am. You're here,
I am here.
and we have a very special guest.
We do.
We have such a special guest. For those of you who are joining us, we want to say welcome to the platform. This is a live show where you can interact. We would hope that all of you here on YouTube or even on Facebook or on Periscope or Twitter Live, wherever you are watching, come and join us, because for the next hour, maybe a little bit longer, we're going to have a very, very, very good time conversing with the two of us, conversing with the director of the Tolkien biography film that just came out this weekend. Mr. Dome Karukoski is here with us, ladies and gentlemen, live at Scum and Villainy. Hey, there you are, buddy.
I'm here.
Hey, oh, and there's one of our staff members, one of our longtime veteran staff from
Yep.
theonering.net. There's Garfei Mao. Everybody say hi to Garf.
She's now going to run from the camera. She's like,
Hey,
I don't
Garfei
wanna
Mao.
be-
She's going to hide. And there's David Baxter lurking in the
yep,
background. From Legion M. There's our buddy, David Baxter.
We
So
got
here
all
we
the
are.
celebrities here tonight.
We have, and here comes Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
We're ready to make the motley crew complete.
Harley Quinn Smith? What? No.
This is where the rubber meets the road. We're going to talk. We can talk anything from Westeros to DC Comics to Lord of the Rings, whatever. We're here for you. Welcome to Torn Tuesday.
And if you guys have any questions, you know how to reach us in the chat room. We're looking at your comments. Feel free. We can see you. It's
Yes.
great.
It is interactive. It is live. It is not Memorex. We are here.
So Dome, it's been a big week for you.
It's been, you could say, press. When you do press, it's,
Yeah.
there's a lot of glamour in it, but there's a lot of work in it.
Had you done press on this scale before?
I did a film called Tom of Finland, which was released in several countries. So that was a lot of flying. A lot of the press was I would fly to a country, do 2 days there, then fly to another country, do 2 days there. I think it was heavy in a different way, whereas this is because when you kind of huge international film, so we were kind of focused. So we were London, New York, but then a lot of like interviews just change. And I noticed, you might say you try to say Eero, but you accidentally say Arda. You know what I mean? You're just like
Going.
yeah, blah, 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 and then and it's so fast. Like you sit in a chair, and the journalist changes, and in like 7-8 minutes, another journalist
Yep.
comes, and your mouth is going.
By the end of the day, you don't even know who you talked to, and you don't remember what you've said. And
Or what was the questions? But I mean, it's you have to be happy. I mean, it's always difficult launching or releasing a drama nowadays, and so everyone who writes about the film, you try to give them the best and be thankful that they're writing about the drama,
Absolutely.
or making a show about the drama.
well, Tolkien was a beautiful movie, as we have told you several times. I know Cliff has as well. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for
Indeed.
bringing it to life. My biggest question for you is, how did you decide which portion of Tolkien's life you wanted to highlight?
That time narrowed intriguingly, because I had heard, and some of the people have heard this story, but I was familiar with the kind of the C.S. Lewis era, because that's living in Finland, time before internet.
Right.
I am older than there was a time.
We're
I know
all
some
older than we appear.
Exactly. Some of the viewers might remember a time when you can't really Google Tolkien. There's no
Wait,
internet.
there was a time before Google?
There's a time before that, exactly. And so the one when a book is released, and I would read all the books as a young person, usually the newspaper would tell about the C.S. Lewis era, and going through Oxford, and that's That's the difficulty, is that that's what the image is, right? That's kind of what people expect from the movie. And then luckily, before I arrived to the project, the screenwriters had already kind of narrowed the timeline. Because one of the biggest problems when you're doing a biopic or a real life person film is that how do you narrow it so it's not 4 hours or 3 hours, which seems to be, for those who don't remember the extended.
And also, how do you capture a life in just a film, you know?
Exactly. And so luckily that time frame was already narrowed. I mean, that script that I then received is a bit different than the finished film, but I kind of found that already intriguing. So I didn't make the decision, basically, saying this, but I emphasized it in a way of, in core, film needs to choose a theme, right? It needs to choose what is the film. If you take a real life character, what are the themes about his characters? And those themes were in the script, and I felt those are actually emotional ones: love, friendship, and creation. Kind of those themes are the emotional that I can feel here.
Can I ask about working with these guys, the writers? Out of everybody we've been talking to at the press pools and at the premieres, I really would have liked to have engaged in conversation with these two gentlemen, because their screenplay is damn good. And you recognized it when you saw it. Let's talk about, did you do a process of rewrites or revisions? And did you work with them in person on this?
Yes, my background is actually a bit like a writing director, which means that, in Europe, we come from an auteur background. And for those who don't know, that kind of means that the director is kind of leading the crew, whereas in Hollywood, the system is called a triangle, where you have a producer, writer, director. So it's kind of a triangle system. It's a bit different.
Yes.
And or like most of the projects are like that. And then Europe is, even though you have a producer, writer, director, it's kind of an auteur-based system. So the directors kind of come and they mash, and there's a certain level of tyranny there of the director, in a good way, and in a bad tyranny. And in a bad way sometimes, yes. And so I'm accustomed to really be hands-on the writing process. And so even coming to this system, then when you get a script, I think we rewrote 4 drafts of the script.
Yes.
And then while I was shooting, I would still create, because most of the fantasy elements was something I brought, because I'm the ultimate Tolkien fan in all honesty, in this. Dan, who's one of our producers, I think he's read the books even more than me. But he could have named the 7 Sons of Fëanor, which I'm not going to now name them.
Different level.
And I'm not going to now name
them.
And I'm not going to now go there because
out of the 7 Sons of Fëanor, the only thing I remember is that 3 of them were Silmarils. That's the only thing. No, that's a little joke. Sorry.
No. But basically, so basically, the fantasy elements often were kind of written during the production. So, for instance, for those who've seen the film, kind of the last shot on the war, which is kind of him confronting ultimate evil, and in a way, it's of course symbolic or allegorical to many confrontations in Tolkien's the professor's work. It's kind of Fingolfin against Morgoth. It's kind of Gandalf against Sauron. It's it is. Gandalf against Balrog. It is kind of several creatures, or Isildur against Sauron. So it's kind of several of those kind of moments that you recognize in his books. So you can't really go like, okay, I gotta have this here. You gotta follow the feeling. So that wasn't the script. So you go like, okay, this is a possibility to bring it in. So Nicholas, come in, and then we place the camera, and then we just shoot it, and then I build this kind of the scene and the fantasy surrounding that emotion, emotion that you feel there, that it's basically a protagonist confronting the ultimate evil, whatever the evil then later in his books will be.
Right. Which, that was beautifully done, by the way. And I love the story that Lily said about you deciding that she needed to dance like an elven princess one day, too. And that was another little fantastical element that probably was not written in, that you went, we need this.
It was not in the script then, of course, but
really?
Of course.
Oh, but it's such a beautiful moment.
No, it's we didn't have that scene. So, of course, the Leo, Bera, and Luthien, it's such a vital and pivotal moment in the professor's life.
One of our other staffers who was at one of the June screening.
Kathy's saying this is the part that one of the other staffers won over.
Scene came on. recognized it so much, and it was just like, I mean, for him, that was the movie.
Yeah.
We've been regaling him with stories about Mike Urban's
yes.
approval of the film.
Yes.
But you have to exactly, and you have to remember that there are different audiences that you're servicing. Right.
Absolutely.
So when you're making a film about Tolkien, someone will expect the following. Edith dances, then Tolkien starts scribbling, and we see the words Beren Luthien. But then for normal audience, it doesn't mean a lot of the audience doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't mean anything.
So
yeah.
which means that you don't necessarily have hey, this is you don't try to point or underline moments like, hey, this is the point, and then it will lead him to writing, right?
Right.
Because that is a very secluded group that it kind of knows it, right? Whereas for the audience, the important is emotion. So the scene, and I think that's where many of those scenes or those moments were not in the script, because it's difficult to put them there so that for the larger audience, it's emotion. You understand he's getting inspired, but you don't necessarily need to know at that moment what the specific moment is. That you can read from the Wikipedia.
And what I really loved about Tolkien versus, let's say, the man who invented Christmas was that Dickens story was so on the nose of just oh, this is clearly what this is. And there was so much left up to interpretation of this is clearly something that had an effect on Tolkien. And it could have inspired this, and here's a way that we view it, but it wasn't stuck in your face as this is what is, and that was so beautiful.
And the reason is because I haven't seen Dickens' film, but my feeling when I watch a biopic, I do get annoyed when the classic moments, like the band is walking on the street, and then an exhaustion pipe goes on, and then they go into the studio and they walk, and they from that beat. They create their best hit ever, right? So okay, I think that's in a way it reduces artistry, or I can never visualize in a film. It's impossible because film is not a written media. I can never visualize totally or profoundly how Tolkien gets inspired. There's so many layers of how that person. It's not. I've done this soon for 20 years. There's no way an author figure could be visualized, right? The efforts often are, like you point out, that he sees something, hears something, and then he starts writing. But it's not that.
Or even just in the subconscious that he doesn't realize is there.
There's so much happening in the subconscious, and there's so much happening in the character's background history, which you can't show, you can't visualize, impossible. But what you can show is the emotion, what the author is feeling. Right, and then you focus on the emotion, what he's feeling. This is a relevant moment, this feels this moment, and then you understand that these are the moments that he clicks into.
That's such a great take.
I was going to say I love that, but I love it's okay, it's fine. No, it's not going to stretch. I'm just going to say, I love the way that you demonstrate his creativity, like the interplay between him and Lily at the tea. And it's well, tell me a story. And he doesn't want to, but she starts it, and he gets into it, and all of a sudden you see him editing in his head as he's talking about things and correcting things, and he comes out with something, and now they are in that zone of that story of Celador. And it's just a beautiful way of showing how creation of a creative thought and process, it was really nice to see.
And that's a good example of a moment. So, for instance, we talked to the professor of Anglo-Saxon in Exeter who holds the same chair as Tolkien, and he was one of the helpers of the film as opening up his creative process. So he basically sits in the same room, if not in the exact same room that Tolkien did. So that's how Tolkien works in that specific scene. There's a word or there's a phrase or idea or something comes in, and he infuses those words and those sentences, and then they mold into a story. And I think in that specific scene where the role of Edith is so difficult, it's about an author figure, it's about a male author figure. How can we bring up Edith, who was so substantial and so important in his life? And I believe very strongly that she was an inspiration in different levels, not just dance.
Absolutely.
She was sparring there. She was intellectual. They were smart. If you look at the pictures for them together, they had this very cheekiness and there's this intellect between them, and there was an understanding. So you want to bring with those scenes kind of their feeling and their mutual feeling.
Was there anything while you're unraveling this story and creating it that you were already a giant Tolkien fan that maybe endeared you more that you didn't know to Tolkien? Something that like was.
Well, I'm probably not such a giant fan as Clifford. I think still I'm a level 24.
Okay.
You don't have to
no.
be
I'm a
level 24 to
but this
appreciate.
guy is like way
no.
past 30 already.
No, but I'm not going to recite the Hobbit's bathing song for you. I'm not going to, but
No.
but
Why not?
No.
no, why not? Why don't you have it committed to memory?
I was so ashamed when we did this with Stephen Colbert. We did this Q&A with the Montclair Film Festival, and he could recite everything. And because I started reading in Finnish, I started reading the books Finnish, and then reread them in English. So my knowledge is not. He's already a demigod in the level.
Yes, it was great. We saw it.
It was so great.
Exactly.
We were there.
But basically, I don't know. I don't think the project itself taught me that much about his works, but I think that when I reread the books, some of the books after, starting the production and knowing his history, I felt more emotional because I understood the certain layers that are in the books. Like when we talk about layers, it doesn't mean it's not a one-on-one inspiration. Like there's maybe a misconception of some people, like for instance, that of course Mordor is not inspired by World War One. It's not that, but there's an emotional journey which he took, which I now realize, which he took in war. So when
it's
I
more of the aftermath of the war and what that
it's
left
the pain,
in his heart.
it's the wound of Frodo. It's the pain of memory, which is I understand immediately when you read that now through you reread Lord of the Rings and you remember the Witch King striking him. You understand that is emotional pain, a grievance that is carrying, right? And you understand it through Tolkien's and his own experience. So now when I read it, and Frodo's that pain will never go away, right? He will never heal. So I mean, he's
indeed.
My point, Tolkien is talking about himself, the pain and the loss that he saw, the destruction that he saw, that Frodo sees during this voyage.
Completely agreed.
Yeah, exactly. His whole generation. So you suddenly understand these layers in the writing that when you infuse them, okay, he's not necessarily using them as direct allegories, as he himself said.
Yes.
But they are you're affected by the subconscious of your own experiences when you're an artist, and every artist does that.
Isn't it funny that people had quite often in reviewing your film had criticized the use of the name Sam for the young private who was there with him, but in real life, was it not so that Tolkien knew one of the young soldiers who was there?
No,
with him?
it was so. Sam's name comes out of. Actually, now I'm so tired. It comes out of English. No, but the idea that I had was that this private's name is Private Hodges, but because he's delirious, Tolkien is a delirium. He kind of drew this when he's delirious. He kind of calls Sam.
Yes.
So it's not. I thought that it's kind of intertextually like the Private Hodges' first name is not necessarily Sam.
Yes.
But Tolkien himself said that Sam represents, I can't remember the direct quote, but represents kind of all those soldiers, all the Batmen, all the kind of soldiers, the normal everyday people there in the trenches. So it's kind of a hint for those who know what he said. Yeah. But I'm not trying to forcefully say that, hey, look, he had a warrior called Sam. Right. But it's tricky. It's tricky. Like it's such a subtext. I understand when people read that, and that's always the viewer's right. Like I never defend like whatever people feel and they want to criticize, they have the right to. But it's difficult to unless you always watching a film with director's commentary. It's like, but that's some will get it. Some have come after the film and told me that they got it, they understood it, that his name isn't really Sam, but it's kind of an just intertextual, but not all get it, and that's fine. It's maybe I should do the job a little bit better next time, so everybody gets it.
No, you did a great job. Speaking of director's cut or commentary, are you going to do an audio commentary for the home video?
I did, but I already had to do it, and I was doing it amidst press, and I was so tired. So I think it has some good parts, and I would love to redo it. But nowadays, it's just like we have to make it. Right. Timeline is so that. I think it's pretty good, and I open a lot in the director's and the audit commentary. I open a lot about, for instance, what a lot of reviews are going is what's fact, what's fiction, So I did it a little bit through that idea that I hope that people watch the film as an emotional experience and
Yes.
not forced on thinking with facts, because you always do choices, and then the audio commentary can kind of if you want to rewatch the film, it kind of go dwell into the backstories more.
I'm glad that you said that, and that's something towards this larger point that I wanted to make. When Professor Tolkien was alive, he got slapped by the critics. Tolkien always had issues with the critics, and at the point he made up
He
a
had
bathtub
problems with his
song.
editors too.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. But after the publishing success that he had, which was wildly successful, years and years later, The Lord of the Rings picked up in the 1960s, and then it became even more of a publishing phenomenon. And people started criticizing Tolkien even more. They came for him. To use modern parlance, they were ready to drag Professor Tolkien. They were going to drag him. And you know what he'd made up? He made up a bathtub song. He was singing in the bathtub, and he was singing to himself, and he said, "The Lord of the Rings is one of those things. If you like it, you do. And if you don't, then you boo."
But that's
He just didn't care. He really didn't care.
It's not about care. I think, of course,
That's amazing.
Of course, we all have. Like I just love when people write about it. Everybody has a right to write about what they want. I think most of the people really love the film, and send a lot of praises, and a lot of them I accept it. And I think what Tolkien, in a way, I don't think Tolkien himself means by that. I love the fact that you sang the song. I don't think he means by fact that he doesn't care. I think there's always an artistic pain when somebody criticizes your work, but yet I think in a very because he was such a gentle and kind man. I think in the same I also aim in my life is the idea is that always it's the readers or the viewers' right. You know, it's like it's a subjective feeling, and you have the right to that.
Yeah.
And I think Tolkien, what was really fun when you read his letters, published by Carpenter and edited with Christopher Tolkien. It was always like starts the letters often like, "I hope the story wasn't too boring," or it's like, "This is one of the greatest fantasy writers ever lived, if not the greatest." And then he himself was, "I hope it wasn't too boring. I'm happy you didn't find." He always has this sentence there. It's a couple of times it comes in the letter. I'm happy that you didn't find it boring. So I think it comes out from a very humble point of view. In that sense, it must have felt painful how people looked down upon him, or downwards to him, but I think at the same time, I think his understanding of life and humanity kind of approved that. He was like, that's fine. That's
Yes.
He was always editing. That's why it took him 17 years to write the trilogy.
Yes, that's true.
Can you talk about
getting
Nicholas Hoult? Because he looks like Tolkien.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about getting Nicholas Hoult on the air. Thank you, Justin, for intervening. It's a beautiful question to bring up. But before we get there, I just wanted to.
I love the fact that he went behind the court. He went to hide.
The hidden secret voice of Justin. I just wanted to say that it's kind of a really cool, interesting. I think it's cool that the readers are reviewing it and giving it 89, 90%, loving it.
Yes.
The fans are loving it.
We have people in the chat room that just said they're going to see it 2 more times this week.
Yes, I've already 2 more times. I've already seen it 4 times. I've seen it 4 times.
I've
You've
seen it 4
7.
times.
And we had a person on Twitter today who said, "I have had 4 conversations with random people in my life about Tolkien because I've been so invigorated by your film, Mr. Karukoski, to talk about my interest in Tolkien." And this is the sweet spot where nobody gives a damn anymore about what the critics say. You've got the readers, you've got the fans on your side.
Passionate fans.
Yeah, you've got the fans who are. So it's really well done, and you're in a sweet spot. I think.
Thank you. I mean, and I don't want to. And again, I think it's always important that people write about dramas, whether it's critical or non-critical or reviews. I think that's vital and important. I think it's important that dramas have a voice, especially dramas we are fighting against the really big ones. Even though it's a studio film from Hollywood, it's still not a big one in terms. It doesn't have a $300 million budget. Yeah, so the dramas need a voice. So I'm just appreciative that people write about it. Regarding Nicholas.
Yes. And how did you get Nicholas
Because
involved?
you know we have a hobbit that came out from the corner and then
Yes.
just vanished again.
Our
so
hobbit
we have to
Justin.
yeah, exactly. So
the
so-
little man behind the
so
curtain.
to answer his
Tom
question,
Bombadil.
to answer his question is that I had seen Nicholas's work and a lot of it, and then just before we started casting, I saw a Netflix film called Sandcastle.
Oh, I remember
And
that.
it was quite different of the roles that he had done. And so he was very much on top of my list. And then the studio had worked with him on the film called The Favorite.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of love. So the studio suggested him, I suggested him, and they were like, okay, great, let's go meet Nicholas.
Wow.
And then I met him, and by that time I had done a very, very intensive research period and kind of formalized a certain interpretation of who Tolkien is, the character is, and how this young Tolkien. Of course, you watch from YouTube, you have these beautiful interviews of him,
Right.
but that's an older Tolkien. So you have to find in different ways. I've read everything, read his letters, and analyzed the illustrations. I went to art school and how he illustrates at a young age. There's different things that meant with a lot of Tolkien experts to hear the analysis. So I had already kind of formed a picture of like what the young Tolkien, the feel of him is. And then I met Nicholas, and we just chatted. At that time, I was still shaping the script, so I didn't send him the script, and we chatted for an hour now, 30 minutes, and he's very intelligent, and he's very witty, and he's a bit goofy, and very playful, and he's very family-driven. I think he had so many traits that Tolkien himself had,
Okay.
and there's a certain humbleness in him, which I also believe very much that Tolkien had. So there were a lot of personal traits in him that felt like this is the right choice. And then seeing how he acted in those movies, it felt like, okay, like, this is an actor that is really blossoming. He's going to be really great. And after that felt it can only be Nicholas. I didn't even meet any other choice.
That's amazing. So he was the top of the list, and then just it worked out.
And sometimes it's sometimes your gut feeling, if it's both mine and both studios' gut feeling, there's some kind of an aura. It's very often the
Absolutely.
gut. There are very often kind of the gut feeling. You have to trust it. I've done this soon
The
20
greater
years.
like force that's around us, guiding us.
Exactly. There's something there just comes in, and you have to trust it.
They-
Like juggling the schedule with this, what was
Juggling
it like
the schedule?
juggling the schedule? Yeah, because he was working on Dark Phoenix, and he's probably got other projects as well that he's working on. So
Yeah, I mean that was actually one of the toughest thing was that when I met him, he was just about to fly to Montreal to shoot Dark Phoenix, and often those films when they go late, when the production goes late, then they're like late 2 months. It's not like we went over with 2 days, but they're like we're going over 2 months.
Yes.
So we were very worried about is he going to be ready to be released before shooting? And he still like he prepared. So we had Skypes. He was in Montreal. After a shooting day, we would Skype and talk about the script and spar about the scenes, and he would study how to illustrate like Tolkien. So I actually have a SMS from him where he's wearing a mask of the beast, and then having an illustration. At first I looked like he has Xeroxed it because it was quite good, but it was done by him.
So in the film, the illustrations, is it also the penmanship? Was that actually Nicholas?
There's actually, yes, there's one where this is a spoiler. So when young Tolkien draws, it's actually Nicholas's hand
Oh, nice.
in one shot. Because we lacked material. We lacked material from young Tolkien's hand, and then, in all honesty, Nicholas he had kind of learned it. So there's one shot which is like Nicholas's hand, but I'm not. You're gonna have to watch and. It's kind of luckily
No.
it doesn't come that late in the film, so it doesn't maybe perhaps spoil your emotion too much.
Oh, not at all.
I don't
But
think that wouldn't spoil anything for me.
this is one of the questions I had on my mind. It is, for those of you who have seen the film, you know that there's a younger set of actors and an older set of actors. Logistically speaking, from a production standpoint, how tricky was that? Was it weird to have, you had to have, casting, as they always say, is 50% of a director's job, casting. And the casting is so fantastic. You have unbelievably talented young actors working as mirror images of the older versions of themselves. How did you manage to do this? Because it's really quite something. It's a big challenge, a very big challenge.
You never do it alone. I mean, we have a casting director called Kate Ringzell, and then here in LA we have a casting director called Ronna Kress, and they would work everything for the film, and so with Nick, we started with Nick. Then of course the problem is how do you find a young actor who looks like Nicholas Hoult. So that was the most difficult part. So we were like auditioning, and Kate and her team were in England auditioning like tens and probably possibly hundreds of young boys, and it was really difficult. And then Harry Gilby, who plays young Tolkien, I think he sent a self-tape that his dad shot to Kate's team, and they were like, you should look at this tape, and the guy looks like him, and
he's really good, by the way.
Yeah, and and then
Harry
wow,
Gilby's
he
really
looks like Nick, and he can actually act very well. So he's not just like taking looks and then hoping that he succeeds.
When he says we hardly carry our spears anymore, everyone in the audience
so
laughs out loud.
Punchline.
He nails it.
And the Chaucer scene. Oh my god.
The Chaucer
Punchline.
scene. That's great. He's great.
And then so basically, and then the other boys, I was auditioning older boys, younger boys at the same time, so kind of matching, finding matching pairs.
Yeah.
And a lot of like chemistry on that. Like it was easier kind of finding matching pairs on the other boys. I think Nick has such a specific look, so that was the most difficult. And then of course it's stylized. If you put them next to each other now, they might not look like each other, but then Nadia Stacy, her hair and makeup team, helped us a lot by stylizing so that you get a feeling of. And what we did also was I had these mannerisms rehearsals. So basically we would study how they walk. So the younger would study how the older would walk. Or I would decide like if the younger actor would have a very specific way of walking, then the adult would come and mimic that. And then we decided like, what's the character? Does he move a lot? Does he hold his right hand always in the pocket? So then the younger and the older would hold.
Did you have a movement coach as well, or
no? This was something that I just did on the
That's amazing.
rehearsal. And then I would shoot. I would take shoot like the four guys walking, and then the four older guys walking, and then young guys walking, and then crossfade it in the edit, so we can see like how much and they kind of train the walk. So all those kind of small things, physical things we did.
That's intensive work on your part of it. I love the extra step and the effort and paying attention to that detail, especially with films like the last biopic that was really on my mind was Bohemian Rhapsody. And Rami actually had a movement coach for Freddie. I was like, so to do it with your guidance, I'm very impressed right now.
I mean, directing is when you jump on a project, it's full on. It's not that you work. It becomes your baby. You work from morning. From the first minute you wake up to the last minute you go to sleep, and
you become a Mad Hatter of sorts with your hand in everything.
Everything, and then you can be. I'm a bit like I go and everything, but I also try as a director. I try to leave room, so we had a great team, and then you leave room. Like sometimes people would come and ask, and this cup or that cup, and then you decide, because it's not because trying to be gracious or something, but more like trying I think this person knows it better than me. There are things that this person knows it better than me. That person, you have to have a good team. That you have to surround yourself with people that know some things better than you. That's basically a lot of the directing. Casting is a big part of it.
People that pick up where you leave off.
Exactly. That you're like, that person will handle that better than me. That person should take the lead.
And I think you found that team. That's amazing.
Yes.
Looking forward, I know you have a screening to get to shortly, so we won't keep you too much longer. Let's say another biopic wants to occur for Tolkien of the later years of him being a writer. Is that something you'd be interested in?
I think I've done my share of biopics. I did Tom of Finland, and then now this one. And the difficulty when you're doing an icon, we talked about criticism, and it's not the criticism, but the difficulty when you make a film about an icon is that everyone has a perception what it should be, and everyone will tell you that when you are preparing for the film, when you're shooting the film, when you're releasing the film, and people tend to forget what's the film that you want to make, and so I think it's such a heavy there's a Finnish phrase, mankeli. If olet niinku mankelissa, so I'm talking Quenya here, a little bit of Quenya. Olet niinku mankelissa koko sen matkan ajan. That's like a Finnish phrase that would say you're kind of you're being pressed like really like a carpet all the time through the way. So it's like a carpet presser, and you have to navigate through that. And you can't, like, somebody will say that, someone will give feedback on the script and say, well, the second act needs some drama. And you go, oh, you know what? This is the 10 minutes when Tolkien becomes a drug addict. Because because you're doing a biopic, you can't do that. So you have to find different ways how to make the drama work in a certain cage, right?
Make it captivating for the audience still.
Exactly. You have to make the drama work, the emotional kind of roller coaster work. Yep. But because it's a biopic, you can't go AWOL.
Yep.
You can't go, oh, now his dog dies. And now he's gonna
and he broke his arm.
Exactly. Now his dog dies, and then he kills everybody around him because the dog dies.
Suddenly he says Dracarys.
Sorry?
The Amazon series that's coming. Would you be involved in that?
I wouldn't mind at all. They would.
Well, there we go.
Especially the downfall of Numenor. If they are, I don't know. Even though here in Hollywood, it's kept such a secret. People don't know. But if they add downfall of Numenor, I think that's such an intriguing. Like, you can do an amazing season just by that. Like, because it's false religions, the deceit, corruption, they have this ultimate amazing society. You're giving both the gift of death and the gift of long life. You're basically as I think Manwë is going like against them, like we've given you everything, right? Edward has given you everything,
and
right?
And you're still not happy.
You're still not happy. I think exactly.
Dude, I am with you on that. Yeah, the downfall of Numenor is probably a fantastic place to
that
begin.
That would be an amazing season.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, people in the chat room have now saying, Amazon, please hire Dome. There you go. They're starting a campaign for you. I've heard you in interviews passionately talk about the Numenorians as well. You would be a great fit to direct that. So yes, Amazon, you have my vote as well.
Yes.
The real deal would be, I think the Lord of the Rings, and of course, with all the forging of rings, Sauron's kind of, all that cunningness and everything, deceit and the betrayal and manipulating people. I think that's intriguing. That's going to be an intriguing couple episodes. But the real deal would be making a Silmarillion for a TV show. If people would give me like, here's, $1 billion, do whatever you want, that would be my choice. Because that's
gotcha.
And the rights,
you need the $1 billion for the rights also. But
we've
basically
been talking about that for years. Everyone says make a series of films out of the Silmarillion, and I say no. It should be a TV show.
I think it's a TV show. It's
Yes.
so episodic, but it's also so human in so many ways. I think Tolkien's his poured.
Anthology series.
And one thing we have to, when people watch the film, by the way, I know people want to reference it through Lord of the Rings. But you have to remember that Lord of the Rings comes 30 years after the film.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, most of the moments of creation, like the Lay of Beren Luthien, most of the moments of creation, most of the elements in the film are actually from the Silmarillion or going towards, and not from the Silmarillion, but the idea of all those fantasy elements, or even when the trees have if you look at the sound, the trees have a sound. It's not a discussion yet, but when the young Tolkien goes there, or the older Tolkien is walking with this, I'm not going to spoil it, but walking in the forest, the trees have a sound. So it's not yet Ents, it's not yet the shepherds, but but still that's from the Silmarillion also.
You have a line of dialogue where Hillary says to his brother, Ronald, do you remember when Mom made us talk to the trees when we were kids? Yeah. What kind of dark magic was that?
Yeah, and of course, I full know that most like the mother didn't make the boys talk to the trees, but the line works better when you phrase that.
Absolutely.
Anyway, the line works better that way.
It's lovely.
But regarding that, so basically, what you have to think that, because my love for Silmarillion is strong, but basically, John Ronald is, during this film, he's actually kind of creating the Silmarillion. So most of it, and every time then, during the film production, the idea was that you take something from the Silmarillion okay, what is the 2 or 3 steps back? When you take two or three steps back, how does he end up into that, right?
Yeah. How
And
do you
every
get from
time I
point A to
feel when
B?
I had those moments when I was creating it, every time, oh, but this would be a great episode. Oh, jeez, you know.
So you already have started the notes. Great. So he's already got notes ready, Amazon. Just listen. They do have a staff of writers going. Somebody also in the chat room just suggested that a Baron and Luthien would be an amazing movie as well.
Indeed, it would.
Yes,
Indeed, it would.
And Turin Turambar. Baron Luthien and Turin Turambar.
Yes.
Yeah, you name it, Children of Hurin, but like, you know, those would be, as standalone movies, those would be the true stories.
There are people in the chat room from Finland who are staying up very, very late into the early morning, and they say hello from Finland. There are people from, they're shouting out to you.
Kiitos, että olette pystyssä.
It's way
Special
at the
shout
top,
out just for
way
all
at the
of
top
you
of the list. Can I talk about one of my favorite moments in your film, even though it's really a complete spoiler? And we've tried to talk with him about this film without spoiling too much, but right near the end, right near the very end, there's a scene, I believe it's Anthony Boyle, who plays Jeffrey Smith, right? And he is by himself. After the information has been given that he died in the war, he is there wandering like a lost soul in the battlefield. And it is such a sad, beautiful, touching, really, really emotionally touching thing, where it seems as if we're looking at the spirit of the young man wandering like a lost spirit in the battlefield, where there's no one else around, an isolated ghost of the war. That happens right before you bring in Genevieve O'Reilly to talk with Nicholas Hoult about publishing Mr. Smith's letters. Spoilers for you guys who haven't seen the film, but it's all the emotion and all the tears and all the power speaking towards the power of art, the value of artistic voices, the value of poetry in our world. It speaks to me on so many levels. I can't thank you enough for having that in the end, because it is. If people might complain, oh, there wasn't enough of this in the film. There wasn't enough Lord of the Rings. There wasn't enough, religiosity in the film. Blah blah blah. What you have in this film, Dome, simply by paying witness to this man's life and his loss, is learning and feeling things about him that you never knew you felt about J.R.R. Tolkien, just by paying witness. I love it. Tell me, what inspired you to have that last shot of Jeffrey Smith wandering like a lost ghost in the battlefield?
Well,
because it's so inspired. It's a great shot.
The shot itself is very, very layered in terms of coming in context of different stories. So I don't want to reveal that, because it's a moment I don't want to talk about that much, because it is kind of an emotional moment, so I don't want to break up the emotional.
You're allowed to keep the magic.
I would allow.
I've said too much.
No, it's fine. It's totally. It's great. Great hearing the feedback. It's what was inspired by the shot. I saw this. I was going through a lot of World War I pictures, and I dug in, read a lot of World War I books and feelings, because there's a good book by John Garth about his war experiences. But there's not that much documentation about, how many times did he hold a gun? We know that he went over the top, and
yes.
And he's a signaling officer, which is not so dramatic, in all honesty. So I was trying to find the emotion, what experiences, what he must have seen. So I was looking through a lot of pictures, like thousands and thousands of World War I pictures, and there's a moment of Christianity, because what's intriguing that, the crucifix, they would always hold a crucifix. So we have in the film, we have a moment when a crucifix in the no man's land, and nobody will touch Jesus.
Yes.
When, that's intriguing. They would tear down the church, but nobody would touch Jesus.
Yes,
and
I remember that shot. It's in the foreground of the shot.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's an allegory with that shot, because there's Christianity, and then you look at the Christianity in his books. There's a lot of things that people don't necessarily get on the first time, or they are. I don't even intentionally try to point them. But for instance, that shot is there's Christianity in his mind, and if in his books, the battle between good and evil is very much coming from Christian perspective. So you have a shot where you have the crucifix, and then you have the Lord of Evil in the background. So it's a battle between Jesus and between the Lord of Evil. So it's a very intertextual shot, and so I would find those shots looking images of the World War I and kind of trying to find my own emotion of what he must have felt and seen in the war. And one of the shots I saw was a lone man walking on the no man's land, which is, for those who don't know,
Wow.
no man's land is the place where you get butchered. So what people would go, basically, because they were so I can't remember the word, but they were so lost and they were so hopeless. And so basically, many of them just would walk. They would just walk the no man's land, and then eventually a German sniper would kill them at some point, right?
Wow.
So the feeling of desperation is the word. So the feeling that Jeffrey Smith had in the war, or at the end, when he's writing the letter, which is a famous letter, and we have it word by word, and it's a real letter, word by word. And we cried with Nick when we were making the scene because it's such a powerful letter. But the feel that he had when he was writing the letter was desperation. And that shot, looking at those soldiers, of course, is, as you pointed out, it's more of a ghost, a spirit. It's much more layered. But it's an emotion for me that these soldiers would have. They would have desperation, and then they would walk into no man's land, and just a German sniper would take them.
This is it.
So, of course, Jeffrey Smith didn't do that, but it's an emotion that's feeling. So it's a poetic way of having images that shows the emotion, what he's feeling when he's writing the letter.
I'm curious, the letter that he wrote to Tolkien is real. Do we know if he wrote one to the other boys?
I don't think so. I think
I was always very touched by the fact that it was Tolkien.
It was Tolkien, and they became, as in the film, they became the closest friends at Oxford. So there's a crew of, and intriguing in real life is first Gilson, Wiseman, and Tolkien, and I mean Tolkien was older than boys, but I think they were in the same class. But Smith was year older than Gilson and Wiseman. He joined a bit later. But when you dramatize, if you have another 5-minute sequence of like him joining later, you end up making the film 3 hour long. So you have to do is like, okay, the boys are already a group from the get-go. I know some will go like, oh, but Smith came along later. But eventually in Oxford, because Tolkien and Smith were in Oxford together, and then 2 other boys were in Cambridge, and you only visited like in the film, like during the weekends, then Smith became the closest friend.
Indeed.
That's awesome. I know you've got to run. We're getting kind of close to actually 6.
One last question about layers. One moment I love, and I would love to hear any feedback, how people read it. But, sorry, because we have a feedback channel here.
Yes.
Is the moment when Tolkien has lost Edith in the film, and then he's basically desperate, and he's in Oxford, and he's, the moment where we have is basically he's shouting a fairy language of the fairies, because he hasn't invented the elves yet. So he's at that point, as in true life, he was kind of fairy stories, and so he shouts fairy language, which is partly Finnish words and a mix of kind of the pre-Quenya time, and then so then he looks upon like the skies and heavens for an answer, and recites Christ by Sinewulf, a very religious poem, and then, of course, about the Star of Arendelle.
Yes.
Which is...
I thought I
Arendelle.
heard him mention that.
So, which of course, when I read the Silmarillion, I'm intrigued how do people analyze it. I read that, the moment itself is very Christian in the film, but I read, because I always read Silmarillion's The Star of Arendelle being quite Christian in it, because in a way, the Mariner Arendelle then becomes a star in the sky and guides, towards the right direction. I don't know how people read that.
So you want to know what people read of that scene, what they thought. So if you guys had thoughts about that, share it in the chat room, and we'll share it with Dome. You actually just got a comment from somebody in Turkey that says, unfortunately, the movie's not opening until July 7th, but they can't wait to see it.
Yes, and here's Anne. Anne Simonson says, yes, I like that scene, Dome. And you know what? Let's see. Mr. Shaw Lane says he needs to address why Tolkien's Christian faith was left out of the movie. And how often are we hearing that? Yet I saw plenty of it in there.
I don't know if you've seen the film, but it's not left out of the movie. For instance, this moment specifically is a very Christian moment when he's in Oxford.
Yes.
lying in the grass, looking up at the heavens, asking for advice or looking for an answer about when Edith leaves, and it's connected to in my mind, a Christian story. And then he has a very deep connection with Father Francis. What is true is that we had 2 additional scenes with Father Francis, and one of them, I think both of them are going to be in the DVD extras, but one of them is a scene that points out maybe more, the Christianity is in the movie, but it's very subtle. And I know, of course,
it is very subtle. I actually very much appreciated that.
Yeah, but it's also like Christianity is religion is very difficult because it's so internal. Like emotion is very internal.
Yes.
And so what do? How do you portray that visually?
Yes.
So we had a scene which tried to do that. So young Tolkien is attending last rites with Father Francis Morgan, and he's reciting the words, the liturgy. So we see that he enjoys it, as he did. Young Tolkien would do that. He would help Father Francis out. Then we cut to older Tolkien in war, meeting a dead man. And so we're trying to show like the spirituality and understand the effect of the spirituality in his work. We screened it to people, and they didn't get it because it's so internal. You don't understand the same way. People most likely haven't noticed, like this scene I just talked about in Oxford. It's a very Christian scene, but they don't know it just because it's so internal.
Yes.
Unless there's, and that's difficulty when portraying. I've done a faith-based film as in my past called Forbidden Fruit, and we encountered the same problems about 2 religious girls, and we encountered the same problems that people didn't understand the conflicts of the feeling, the emotions, because they're here. There's so much here and so difficult.
Yes.
So the answer is, it's not left, the Christianity is not left out of the film, but I think it's just, maybe I'm a failure as a filmmaker, I haven't found the way of how to visualize it.
How to merge the two.
Well, I was very pleased with what I recognized as a very informed Catholicism, which was in the background of almost everything.
It is,
especially
and
with calm meaning.
It is,
Yes.
and that's the thing. It is
Even what you just said about that last scene and what he's reciting, I was like, is a touch back to his
It's a
Christian
religious
faith.
poem, and of course, it's about value. It's a person who acts on Christian values and the morals. So it's so deep rooted in him that when I showed it to my Catholic friends, they were like, "Yeah, we get it. It's fully there." But I understand people. I understand the hopes and people, and it's what the word is, viewers' right.
Yes.
That they have hopes for something more. Some people have hopes for the C.S. Lewis era.
Well, and in the first cut that we saw the first cut we saw back in June, there was no mention of Edith not being Catholic, and in that being part of why the father didn't want him to see her.
This is true. So the other way around, the turn is that when we showed the script to people, there was actually an actor who refused for a role because in his terms, he said, quote unquote, it whitewashes Catholicism, that the priest should at least beat the boys. Okay. So there's always a different perception of what you want. So for
this
instance,
is great. Somebody just said, if I may say, I am a Christian, and I was very touched hearing how much thought that you put into weaving faith into the film.
Yeah, I mean, we honestly have tried to be very true, and I know some headlines are what they are, and that's what happens, and you can't control everything, but we really try to be honest. And regarding why it was left out, actually, so it's a balancing issue. So we have to cut this scene because it doesn't work in the screening, it doesn't where he's very faith-based scene.
Indeed.
Then in real life, as Father Francis forbids Tolkien to not meet Edith, partly because she's Protestant and he's Catholic. So then it's always a balancing. So if you cut a faith-based scene where we see Tolkien's love of faith, and then if you have a scene where a priest forbids Tolkien because of religion, and Tolkien abides that, it makes him an asshole. It makes the priest look like an asshole, right? So we try to find the right balance, and that's why in the cut it wasn't. And then when people said, no, you should still have it there, and we screened it to people, we added it in the edit because Father Francis still is a very gentle and beautiful father figure.
Well, it's funny because Professor Tolkien, being as religious as he was very deliberate to keep religion out of The Lord of the Rings. And you, yourself, already having been a filmmaker who's made a faith-based film, you wanted to bring this story revolving around memory and emotion and color. It isn't necessarily a deep, hard analysis of his books and his faith. This is not what the project was you started to make, and it's not where we ended up at the end. So I don't know why everyone's complaining so much. I mean, really. Really. I mean,
it's also like,
I'm just saying. Honestly, I'm just saying. But
maybe someone has a better way of writing it in, and everybody has that right. But I love the fact that internet is so uncontrollable. I read some of the headlines, and then you're like, no, please, and you wanna like comment, and you wanna comment, and you wanna have a discussion, debate. But it's also impossible in internet. It's discussion and debate nowadays. I tried that in the beginning time of Twitter and internet and Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
You
And
read into
everybody
the trolls?
remembers that. It's nowadays debate or discussion is impossible in internet. It's just I've given up. Like I tried so many times, because when you try to formalize something that you think or you feel, and you try to like, I want to explain this in words, boom. You are there for 3 days.
That's why we have.
You
That's
don't
why
see
we
your
have
kids.
Torn, is so we
You
can
don't see your
express it
kids, and
here.
you die of hunger because you're like.
Yes. All right.
You spend your life.
Okay, as much as I would like to talk about Thingol and his attitude towards Beren, because it's also about Elrond.
Of course.
Elrond's
Yeah,
attitude towards Aragorn.
It
It's
is.
all in
It's
there.
all
I
there.
really
It's
want
all
to talk
there.
about
Very good
that stuff.
point, very
But
found.
before the time runs out, the question from our producer is, how did you feel seeing all these fans appearing at all these events in full costumes? And how do you feel now when you see fans and hear them saying, all I want to do is start rereading Tolkien because of seeing this film?
One of the motivations why I did this film was I was doubting it. In all honesty, when I got the script, I was doubting, do I have the right to do the film about the professor? Eventually, but then eventually someone's going to do it. Eventually.
Might as well be you.
Yeah, exactly. Then I'm a fan. So one of the motivation is that, I hope that, there's generations and I'm privileged enough to read the books before the films. There was an animation out, but I was living in a rural village with 2,000 people. This is time before internet, and there's one VHS rental. If the film is not there, it doesn't exist. So I saw the animation maybe 15 years later than I read the books. And then, funnily in Finnish Friends, I'm actually opening the animation in one of the cinemas, Kino Regina. Finnish friends go, I'm going to open the film and talk about the animation. Anyway, let's not.
Cool.
That's not. Anyway, do an introduction for the animation. Anyway, and also in Sodankylä Film Festival, I'm going to do that. So Finnish friends, I'm doing the introduction for the animation. Anyway, so a little ad there. But the point
all
is,
the plugs, do 'em
point
all.
is, one of the motivations is that I can remember, and we probably all been there, right? I can remember the beautiful sensation and moments, and I appreciate especially with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, what Jackson's and teams did. I think that, especially the Lord of the Rings trilogies, we watch it with my wife like every Christmas.
Yeah.
And now it's more difficult with the kids, but and before. Yeah. But and they extended again length. So, but one of the motivations to take people back to that emotion that I had, and I assume everybody has, the time before films, time before images, you're reading something on the page, and I think authentically you are more closer what the author, what Professor Tolkien wanted. So part of that is the hope that people find the movie and they hopefully like the movie, and then they read the books.
We've already got a comment. Yes, Finland will be there.
Yes, Dome. It says here, Dome, I just have to say that the cellar door scene is one of my favorite in all of cinema. So much nuance in the performance and the visuals. And then Jen, our good friend Jen Bourgeois, says that moment in the film where Tolkien wanted to have Geoffrey's poems published, it was a beautiful and very emotional scene. I now need to, at some point, find a copy of Geoffrey Smith's poems.
Which I need to do that too. That's something that inspired me out of the movie.
Yes.
Because when you get to the end of that sequence, there's 2 women.
I'm not gonna don't guide the people what's there, don't reveal. But it's true, and again, those who don't want to know fact and versus fiction, it's a good example. It was so close your eyes if you don't want to know fact and you want to just feel the
Or
film.
if you don't want
in real
spoilers
life.
or anything.
in real life, it was actually Ruth Smith and Jeffrey's mom, who published them and really like fought for that, and actually Wiseman helped Tolkien, but you dramatize the scene so that you flush the
Right.
emotion of it.
Absolutely.
Right, the importance of Tolkien.
And I'm okay with the takes that you made, the steps, the decision for
Exactly.
the cinematic effect of that.
Me too.
To answer your question from earlier, everybody, the general consensus is that they agree with your interpretation of the Silmarillion for that scene.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Yes.
Got it. Because there's debate. There's always
Yes.
debate. We debated about Tom Bombadil.
Yes.
Yes.
And it is always, and I think that's also great when you read a book, and that's one of the most privileged things about his work, about Tom Bombadil, that we can sit and years and years and debate who is Tom Bombadil. I think that's valuable.
Yeah.
That's
Ones I have to
something we
run.
talk about weekly.
Yeah.
People still literally debate whether the Balrog in Moria has metaphorical wings or real, literal wings. That's the way we are. We're ringers. We love
That's
doing
what we
that.
do.
But one
love
thing
doing
that
that.
one thing that you have to remember, that because Balrogs, being demons, being Maiar, they are most likely different in shape.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Gothmog, and most likely he's different than Durin's Bane. So would you? And I'm most of the fans know this, but I mean, that again allows you to envision your own Balrog, which each and every, so it's exactly. So
Yes.
it's you're not you
Right.
don't have to like be, it has to be like this. I think again coming back to every
Different
viewer's, every
interpretations.
reader's right.
It's art.
True.
It's always the reader's right.
Yep.
That's true.
Thank you so
thank you
much
much.
for joining us.
Mr. Dome Karukoski, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, let's have a big round of applause.
It's been an absolute pleasure getting to work with you in the last month over the promotion of this film. Thank you so much for coming in.
Yes, sir. And I'm happy to call you friend, if I may. Melon. May Govanen. Mr. Dome Karukoski here, ladies and gentlemen, on theonering.net. He has to leave, so off he goes into the great white north.
But you still have
flying
me
away.
and Cliff for a while.
Hello, Chelsea.
Hi. Somebody
I'm
just
here.
asked what was the name of Jeffrey Smith's book. I believe it's A Spring
Oh,
Harvest.
wait. Do you have a Sharpie, Kathy, as you always do?
I have a Sharpie.
Yes, and can I say thank you very much for this bottle of wine, Dome. This is fantastic. I have my ticket from
The
the West
premiere.
Coast premiere. Dome, would you be so kind? Which side would you like, front or back? That's a silver pen. Yeah, I know. I mean, this is my one last chance. Next time I have to fly to Finland, so I might as well get this chance while you're here, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, wow. I guess we're saying goodnight. Justin is trying to tell us to say
we
goodnight.
still have things we need to talk about.
Thank you. All right, that's great. Now, wait. Say goodnight. He's just cut us off. Are we off?